My name is Elena Brooks. I was 29 when I realized that the deepest kind of rejection doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes, it comes from the very people who raised you. The message arrived on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting at our small kitchen table, helping my 8-year-old daughter, Lily, finish her homework. Rain tapped softly against the window, filling the room with a comforting rhythm. Everything felt perfectly ordinary until my phone buzzed. It was a text from my older brother. Mom wants everyone at her 60th birthday next Saturday. Everyone, except you and Lily. She said it's better if you don't come. For a few seconds, I simply stared at the screen. It had to be a mistake. I waited for another message, expecting him to explain that he'd sent the wrong text or that Mom had changed her mind. Nothing came. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. Please don't make this harder than it already is. Harder. That single word echoed in my mind. Across the table, Lily looked up from her notebook with a bright smile. Mom, can we bake Grandma's favorite lemon cake this weekend? My throat tightened. I tried to answer, but no words came. She had been excited about the birthday for weeks. She'd spent hours making Grandma a colorful card, decorating it with tiny silver stars and a crooked rainbow because Grandma once told her that rainbows were proof that hope always follows a storm. She had no idea she wasn't invited. Neither did I. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, I finally gathered the courage to call my mother. She answered on the third ring. There was no warmth in her voice. I suppose your brother already told you. I took a slow breath. Is it true? Silence stretched between us before she finally sighed, as though she were explaining something obvious. Every one of my children has made me proud, except you. The words hurt more than I expected. Not because they surprised me, because, deep down, they confirmed what I'd been trying not to believe for years. You chose to be a lowly single mother, she continued. I don't want uncomfortable conversations at my birthday. Your sisters-in-laws will be there. Important people will be there. I'm not going to spend the evening explaining your situation. For a moment, the sound of the rain disappeared. All I could hear was my own heartbeat. Memories rushed through my mind. I remembered staying up until dawn helping my younger brother study while Mom worked late shifts. I remembered putting off college after Dad died because someone had to keep our family together. I remembered selling my first car so my sister wouldn't lose her apartment. None of it seemed to matter anymore. In my mother's eyes, every sacrifice had been erased by a single choice. The choice to keep my daughter after the man who promised to stay walked away before she was even born. I understand, I whispered. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't acceptance. It was simply the only thing I could say without breaking apart. After I ended the call, I quietly walked into Lily's room. She was fast asleep, still holding the birthday card she'd made for her grandmother. The silver glitter shimmered in the moonlight spilling through the curtains. I stood there for a long time. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I was simply listening to the silence. Because somewhere in that quiet, something inside me had shifted. I couldn't see it yet, but my mother's birthday would become the day our family was finally forced to confront a truth that had been buried for years. The next morning, before Lily woke up, I quietly slipped the birthday card into a drawer. I couldn't bring myself to throw it away. It was too full of hope. Children make gifts believing, without question, that they'll be received with love. I wasn't ready to tell my daughter that sometimes adults break that simple promise. As we ate breakfast, Lily looked at me with the same excitement she'd carried for weeks. Are we still going to Grandma's party? Her question hung in the air, heavier than either of us realized. I reached across the table and gently squeezed her hand. Not this time, sweetheart. She tilted her head, searching my face. Did Grandma forget? I forced a small smile. No, honey. Sometimes grown-ups make choices that are difficult to understand. She was quiet for a moment, trying to make sense of words no 8-year-old should have to hear. Then she gave a little shrug and said, I hope she has a happy birthday. That was Lily. Even when her own heart was disappointed, she still found room to wish someone else well. After dropping her off at school, I drove to work with my mother's words playing over and over in my head. Every one of my children has made me proud, except you. For years, I'd convinced myself those little moments didn't mean anything. The invitations that somehow never reached me. The family photos taken after I'd already left. The holiday dinners where my seat always seemed to end up at the far corner of the table. Each moment, by itself, was easy to explain away. Together, they painted a picture I could no longer ignore. Around lunchtime, my younger cousin Ava called. "I just heard," she said quietly. I leaned back in my chair. "So, everyone knows?" There was a long pause before she answered. "Elena, they've known for weeks." My grip tightened around my coffee cup. "Weeks," she sighed. "Your mom told everyone you weren't coming because you were too busy. I had no idea she'd actually asked you to stay away." For a moment, the office around me seemed to disappear. It wasn't just that I'd been left out. My story had been rewritten before I ever had the chance to tell it myself. Ava hesitated. "There's something else." I didn't interrupt. "Your mom's planning a family tribute during the party. Everyone's supposed to stand up and share memories about how she's influenced their lives." A bitter laugh almost escaped me. Not because it was funny, because I couldn't imagine standing in that room, smiling politely, pretending we'd always been a happy family. That evening, after Lily was asleep, I pulled an old wooden box from the back of my closet. I hadn't opened it in years. Inside were faded photographs, old report cards, handmade birthday cards, and neatly folded letters my father had written before he passed away. As I sorted through them, one envelope stopped me. Across the front, in my father's familiar handwriting, were 4 simple words. "For Elena, when you're ready." I frowned. I didn't remember ever seeing it before. The paper had turned yellow with age, but the seal was still intact. For several minutes, I simply held it in my hands, wondering how it had stayed hidden for so many years. Maybe some answers don't arrive when they're written. Maybe they wait until we're finally ready to receive them. I carefully slipped my finger beneath the edge of the envelope and broke the seal. I had no idea that the words waiting inside would change everything I believed about my family and transform the meaning of my mother's birthday forever. My hands trembled as I unfolded the letter. The paper carried the faint scent of cedar, just like the pieces of wood my father kept in the top drawer of his desk. In an instant, I wasn't sitting alone in my apartment anymore. I was 12 years old again, watching him write with slow, careful strokes, while softly humming a tune only he seemed to know. "My dear Elena," the letter began simply. "If you're reading this, life has probably become more complicated than I ever wished for you. I can't know what your future will look like, but I do know the kind of person you've always been." I stopped. The words blurred as tears filled my eyes, turning the ink into soft blue smudges. I blinked them away, took a steadying breath, and kept reading. "You have always carried more than your share. One day, you may wonder whether being kind was worth the cost. When that day comes, I want you to remember this. Your worth is never determined by the people who fail to see it." I read those words once, then again, and one more time. It felt as though my father had reached across the years to answer a question I never found the courage to ask. The letter never mentioned my mother. It didn't predict what our family would become. Instead, it reminded me of something I'd slowly forgotten while spending years chasing approval that always seemed just out of reach. I'd spent so much of my life trying to prove I was enough. Maybe I never had to. Maybe I already was. The following afternoon, my sister Olivia called. Her voice was unusually hesitant. "I don't know if I should tell you this." I gave a small, tired smile. "You've already called. You might as well finish." She let out a quiet sigh. "Mom's putting together a slideshow for her birthday." "That actually sounds nice." "It would be," she said softly. "Except you're hardly in any of it." I closed my eyes. "What do you mean?" "There are hundreds of pictures. Family vacations, graduation ceremonies, birthdays, weddings." Her voice almost disappeared. "You're only in 2 of them, and both are group photos where you're standing way in the back." I didn't respond, because I already knew why. Most of those pictures had been taken by me. I'd spent years capturing everyone else's happiest moments without realizing I was slowly disappearing from the family's memories. That evening, I opened an old laptop and searched through folders I hadn't looked at in years. Thousands of photographs filled the screen. Dad laughing as he accidentally burned hamburgers on the backyard grill. Mom smiling before life's disappointments had settled into the lines around her eyes. My brothers and sisters tearing open Christmas presents. Little Lily taking her first wobbly steps while the whole family cheered. Birthday parties. School plays. Anniversaries. Family reunions. Every milestone that mattered. I had preserved them all. Yet in almost every photo, I was nowhere to be found. Not because I hadn't been there. Because I'd quietly stepped behind the camera, believing that making everyone else's memories mattered more than appearing in them myself. As image after image passed across the screen, one thought settled quietly in my heart. The story my family remembered was incomplete. Not because anyone had intentionally lied, but because no one had noticed the person who had been preserving every chapter. My eyes drifted back to my father's letter lying beside the laptop. For the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about whether I should attend my mother's birthday. I was thinking about something far more important. The truth deserved to be seen. Not to shame anyone. Not to settle old scores. But to restore the pieces of a story that had quietly been forgotten. And for the first time, I began to understand that the strongest voice in any family is often the one that has remained silent the longest. Over the next few days, I kept myself busy. Work occupied my mornings and afternoons, while my evenings belonged to Lily. She filled our little home with stories about school, colorful drawings taped to the refrigerator, and the endless stream of questions that only an 8-year-old could think to ask. She never brought up Grandma's birthday again. But one night, as I tucked her into bed, she looked up at me and whispered, "Do you think Grandma still loves me?" The question stole the breath from my lungs. I gently brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I think people can love someone," I said softly, "and still make choices that hurt them." She searched my face for a moment, then slowly closed her eyes. I hope she remembers me someday. After she drifted off to sleep, I stayed sitting in the hallway outside her room, letting those words echo in the quiet. No child should ever have to wonder whether they were easy to forget. Saturday arrived beneath a cloudless blue sky. The day that felt so heavy to me looked joyful to everyone else. My family gathered at the country club to celebrate my mother's 60th birthday, and my phone buzzed every few minutes with photos shared by relatives. Smiling faces, beautifully decorated tables, gold balloons floating above the dance floor, a large sign that read, "Celebrating 60 wonderful years." I looked through every picture without bitterness. For the first time, I wasn't imagining what it would have felt like to be there. I'd finally accepted that I wasn't. Instead, Lily and I spent the day at a quiet botanical garden on the other side of town. She carried her sketchbook everywhere we went, determined to draw every flower that caught her eye. We wandered beneath shaded trees, listened to birds singing overhead, and fed ducks by a peaceful little pond. It wasn't the celebration we'd expected, but somehow, it became exactly the day we needed. While Lily sat beneath an old oak tree, proudly sketching a bed of wildflowers, my phone rang. It was Ava. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the urgency beneath it. "Elena, something happened." I straightened in my seat. "What is it?" "During the family tribute, your mom thanked everyone for supporting her through the years. Then she said she'd carried the family almost entirely on her own." I didn't say a word. Ava continued. "At first, everyone just nodded. Then Aunt Margaret quietly asked who'd been arranging Dad's medical appointments after he got sick. My heart skipped a beat. And someone answered you." She paused before continuing. "Then another person remembered that you postponed college to take care of everyone after your dad passed away." Another pause. "And then someone else brought up the semester you paid your brother's tuition." According to Ava, the room slowly fell silent. No one argued. No one accused anyone of lying. People simply began remembering. One memory led to another, each one uncovering a part of the story that had been overlooked for years. It wasn't about proving my mother wrong. It was about finally giving the truth a chance to speak. Ava's voice softened. "People started asking where you were." I looked across the pond. Lily had just finished her drawing and was holding it up with a proud smile, waiting for me to admire it. A smile found its way onto my face. "I'm exactly where I need to be," I said quietly. After we ended the call, a gentle breeze rustled the branches overhead. For years, I'd believed I had to defend myself. Instead, the truth had found its own voice. And somewhere across town, my mother was beginning to learn that some absences speak louder than any words, not because of the person who's missing, but because of everything they quietly carried while they were there. By the time Lily and I arrived home that evening, my phone was overflowing with missed calls and unread messages. For a long moment, I simply looked at the screen. A few months earlier, I would have answered every call without hesitation, convinced that staying silent would only make things worse. This time, I did something different. I put my phone aside and made dinner. Lily happily helped set the table, carefully placing 2 paper napkins beside our plates as though we were celebrating something special. In a way, we were. Not a birthday, not an apology, just the quiet comfort of being together. After Lily had gone to bed, I finally picked up my phone. The first message was from my younger brother. "I owe you an apology. Today made me realize how much you've carried for all of us. I should have spoken up a long time ago." The next message came from Aunt Margaret. "Your father would be incredibly proud of the woman you've become." I read those words twice before locking my screen. They meant more to me than I could ever put into words. A moment later, another notification appeared. This one was from my mother. There was no long explanation, no apology, no attempt to change the story. Just a single sentence. "Can we talk tomorrow?" I stared at the message for several seconds. Years ago, I would have seen it as my chance to finally earn her approval. But something had changed. I didn't need her permission to believe I was enough. My father had already reminded me of that. The next morning, I opened the old wooden box once again. Beneath the photographs and letters, I found a small leather notebook. The moment I recognized my father's handwriting, I smiled. Inside were dozens of brief journal entries, little reflections about ordinary days that had once seemed insignificant. One page caught my attention. "Elena always notices when someone else is hurting. I only hope someone remembers to notice her, too." I closed the notebook and held it against my chest. The room was silent, but for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt comforting. He had seen me, even during the years when I believed no one had. Later that afternoon, I agreed to meet my mother at a quiet cafe. Not because I was ready to forgive, not because I expected easy answers, but because I wanted to hear the truth, whatever it might be. As I walked toward the cafe, I realized something inside me had quietly changed. The weight I'd carried for so many years was gone. Not because the past had disappeared, but because I no longer needed to carry it alone. I wasn't walking into that conversation hoping to change my mother's opinion of me. I was simply showing up as the person I'd always been. And somehow, that felt like the greatest victory of all. When I pushed open the cafe door, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting alone by the window. The coffee in front of her had gone cold, untouched for who knew how long. She looked up as I approached. For the first time in years, she didn't seem certain of what to say. And in the quiet moment before either of us spoke, I realized the hardest conversation of our lives was only just beginning. My mother stood as I walked toward the table, then paused, as though she wasn't sure whether to hug me or simply wait. It was such a small moment that most people would have overlooked it. But I noticed. She had always carried herself with quiet confidence, always seeming to know exactly what to say. Seeing uncertainty in her eyes felt unfamiliar. "Thank you for coming," she said softly. I gave a small nod and took the seat across from her. For a while, neither of us spoke. Around us, the cafe carried on with its usual rhythm, the gentle clink of coffee cups, quiet conversations drifting from nearby tables, and the steady hiss of the espresso machine behind the counter. It felt strange that the world could seem so ordinary while two people sat across from each other, trying to unravel years of silence. At last, my mother lowered her gaze to her hands. "The party didn't go the way I imagined." I heard. A tired smile crossed her face before quickly fading. I thought everyone would simply accept what I said. She paused. Instead, they started talking about you. I remained silent. There was nothing I needed to add. They remembered things I'd stopped noticing, she continued. Your father's doctor's appointments. Your brother's tuition. The years you spent taking care of everyone while I convinced myself I'd done it all alone. Her voice faltered. I realized I'd been telling myself a version of the story that wasn't entirely true. The words lingered between us. It wasn't a full apology, but it felt like the first honest thing she'd said in a very long time. After a moment, she reached into her handbag and slid a small envelope across the table. I found this while cleaning out an old cabinet after the party. Inside was a photograph. It showed my father, little Lily as a toddler, and me sitting together on a picnic blanket in the park. Dad wasn't looking at the camera.
He was looking at me.
His smile was filled with quiet pride. I turned the picture over. On the back, in his familiar handwriting, were a few simple words. She doesn't ask to be seen. That's why we must never stop seeing her. My thumb traced the faded ink. Neither of us spoke for a long time. Finally, my mother broke the silence. I don't know when I stopped seeing you. I looked out the cafe window, watching the afternoon sunlight stretch across the sidewalk. I don't think it happened all at once, I said quietly. Sometimes people lose sight of someone little by little until one day they realize that person has almost disappeared. A tear slipped down her cheek. She made no effort to wipe it away. I'm sorry, Elena. The words were simple. They came years too late, but they were honest. I knew they couldn't erase the missed birthdays, the unanswered calls, or the years I'd spent wondering why I never seemed to be enough. Some wounds can't simply be undone. But the truth, even when it arrives late, can still become the first step toward healing. As we stood to leave, my mother hesitated again. Would you tell Lily I'm sorry too? I thought about the birthday card still tucked safely inside the drawer at home, waiting for a day that had never come. Then I looked back at her. I'll tell her you want the chance to earn her trust, I said gently. Because trust isn't rebuilt with words alone. She nodded without arguing. For the first time, she accepted that repairing what had been broken would take more than an apology. It would take patience,
Consistency, honesty, and time.
As I walked out of the cafe, I realized I no longer felt like the daughter who'd been left off the guest list. I felt like the woman who had finally stepped out of the shadows and into a life where she no longer needed anyone else's invitation to know she belonged. A week passed before I finally told Lily about my meeting with Grandma. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon, and we were in the kitchen baking chocolate chip cookies. A light dusting of flour covered the countertop, and Lily was wearing an oversized apron that nearly reached her ankles. She always insisted on cracking the eggs herself, even though I usually had to fish out a tiny piece of shell afterward. As she slowly stirred the batter, she glanced up at me. Mom, did you see Grandma? I did. She stopped stirring for a moment. Was she mad? I smiled gently and shook my head.
No.
She was sad. Lily thought about that for a few seconds before asking another question. Did she say she was sorry? Yes, I replied. She looked back at the bowl, then up at me again. Do you believe her? Children have a remarkable way of asking the questions adults spend years trying to avoid. I believe she meant it, I said honestly. But saying you're sorry and proving you've changed aren't always the same thing. Lily nodded as if that answer made perfect sense. I think everyone should get a chance to do better. Her words sounded so much like my father's that I had to blink back unexpected tears. A few days later, my mother called again. This time, she wasn't inviting me to anything. Instead, she asked if she could stop by and bring something for Lily herself. When she arrived, she stood on the porch holding a small gift bag, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her. Lily carefully peeked inside. To my surprise, the bag held the birthday card she'd made weeks earlier. The same one I tucked away in the drawer. I looked at my mother, confused. I found it when I stopped by while you were at work, she admitted quietly. Your neighbor let me leave something for you, and I noticed the card. Then she turned to Lily. I should have accepted this the day you made it. Lily smiled, her kindness as effortless as ever. "I can make you another one." My mother closed her eyes for a brief moment, as if those simple words offered more grace than she felt she deserved. "You don't have to," she whispered. "I want to," Lily answered with a smile. The two of them sat together at the dining table, surrounded by colored pencils, markers, and blank sheets of paper. They didn't talk very much. They didn't have to. Sometimes healing doesn't begin with big speeches or perfect apologies. Sometimes it starts with the quietest moments, a shared box of crayons, a warm cup of tea, and the simple choice to stay instead of walking away. As I watched them together, I realized the biggest change hadn't happened inside my mother. It had happened inside me. I was no longer measuring every conversation by whether I felt accepted. I wasn't searching for signs that I finally belonged. I'd already found the answer to that question. My worth had never depended on anyone else's approval. Late that afternoon, sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor as my phone buzzed with a new message in the family group chat. My brother had shared an old photograph from years ago. It was one I'd taken. This time, beneath the picture, he had written, "Taken by Elena, the one who quietly held our family together for years. We see you now." I smiled. Not because everyone had finally recognized me, but because I no longer needed that recognition to believe in my own story. Even so, reading those words felt like turning the final page of a chapter that had remained unfinished for far too long. The past would always be part of us. But for the first time in years, the future felt wide open and filled with hope. Several months have passed since my mother's 60th birthday. Life didn't transform overnight. It rarely does. We're still a family learning how to heal, and healing isn't a straight path. There are awkward conversations, moments when old habits slip back in, and times when my mother begins to say something hurtful before catching herself. Then she pauses, takes a breath, and chooses different words. That's the difference. Now she notices. And so do the rest of us. On a cool autumn afternoon, we gathered for a family picnic in the same park where my father had taken so many photographs over the years. There were no speeches, no decorations, and no special occasion to celebrate. Just blankets spread across the grass, homemade food shared between generations, children laughing as they chased one another through the trees, and familiar stories that somehow never grew old. Lily came running toward me with a grin that stretched from ear to ear.
Mom.
"Grandma wants you in the picture." I looked up. My mother was standing beside the photographer, searching for me. She wasn't holding the camera. She wasn't arranging everyone into neat rows. She was simply waiting for me. For years, I'd been the one behind the lens, preserving everyone else's memories while quietly disappearing from them myself. This time, someone else was taking the photograph. "Everybody ready?" the photographer called. As I walked over, my mother gently reached for my hand. The gesture was small. There was nothing dramatic about it. No audience. No performance. Just a quiet moment that said everything words couldn't. "I'm glad you're here," she whispered. I smiled. So am I. Not because every wound had healed. Some scars take much longer than that. But because healing had finally begun. The camera clicked. For the first time in years, I wasn't standing at the edge of the frame. I was exactly where I belonged. That night, after Lily had fallen asleep, I opened my father's letter one more time. The paper had become soft from being unfolded so often. My eyes found the same sentence that had carried me through my darkest days. "Your value is never decided by the people who fail to recognize it." I smiled, folded the letter with care, and slipped it back into its envelope. Then I placed it beside Lily's birthday card. One had reminded me of who I had always been. The other reminded me of the kind of person I wanted to become. When I switched off the light, the house settled into its familiar, peaceful silence. I realized then that being excluded from my mother's birthday had once felt like the end of everything. Instead, it became the beginning of a new chapter. Not a story about revenge. Not a story about proving anyone wrong. But a story about truth finally finding its voice, dignity surviving disappointment, and love learning, slowly and imperfectly, to recognize what had been there all along. Sometimes justice isn't watching someone lose everything they once held. Sometimes it's realizing you've finally laid down the burden of needing someone else's approval. From that day forward, I never waited for an invitation to know where I belonged. Because home was no longer a place I had to earn. It had become the quiet certainty I carried within my own heart. If Elena's story resonated with you, let it remind you of one important truth. Your worth is never defined by the people who fail to see it. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving someone wrong. It's finding the courage to move forward with dignity, kindness, and respect for yourself, even when life doesn't go the way you hoped. If you enjoyed the story, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear this message today. We'd also love to hear your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Elena's position? Your perspective or personal experience could be exactly the encouragement someone else needs. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.